Well, let me introduce you really quick. So this is Carrie Missele, and she is the practice lead for L&D at Inspirant Group. And I have huge amounts of respect and admiration for Carrie. We've worked together, and what I love is you're a leader and you're also a practitioner. So I've seen you in action. You can design, you can develop, and you can actually do the training and all the L&D. But you're also leading a team doing that, and you develop products too. I've seen you develop Immersity, which is one of the L&D products at Inspirant Group. It was one of their first products, and I think you were the perfect leader to lead that initiative. So, Carrie, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I love talking to you. You make me feel so good.
Yeah, I got to butter up the guests before we get going. So on this show, what I was thinking about is I'll always bring a guest on and we can talk about one of the videos that I've done and post it on LinkedIn and YouTube and all that kind of stuff. So today, the video we're going to reference is the onboarding video that I posted last week, and I'll add the link down below if you guys want to watch that. And I'll just pull up some of the slides that I talked about, and then Carrie and I will just discuss and kind of riff off of that and see if we can add some value and some more information and knowledge to the people watching. Sound good?
Yes.
All right. So I kicked off that video talking about different onboarding experiences. So Carrie, I can walk through this, but do you have any horror stories of your own for onboarding or that you've heard from others?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think, and I just want to say when I was watching this, Daniel, I think you did a really good job, of describing what it could feel like. And when you're going through this, at least for me as a viewer watching this video, I thought, oh my gosh, this is so terrible, right? And you start to have these emotions about like this poor Maya, this poor Sally. But honestly, and you're right about this, like this happens so much more than we think, or that people even want to acknowledge. And I think that's the key, is that we need to get into a mindset of like, hey, people, this is what's happening. And so we have to fix it. And I love that you gave a really, a process or a framework to execute, and get it done. But this is really it. I mean, if you think it's not happening in your organization, you're probably wrong, unfortunately.
Yeah. And one of the best things to do to find out if it's happening is just to do employee surveys, right? Like, how was the onboarding experience that you had? And I would send the surveys not just to new hires, but also hiring managers, because you kind of want to think about their whole experience together, not just the new hires alone.
I think, but also too, if I can just jump back into what we were saying, I think that what I also love about this is that you're sharing the experience of the hiring manager. I think as any, good manager feels a lot of excitement around a new hire, but also a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure to make sure, I need to validate this candidate's decision to join my team. I also need to make sure that I made the right decision in choosing the candidate. And, do I have them from the start, really feeling like they're engaged and understand what's going on? And so this idea that the hiring manager is also one who, is trying to do her job.
Oh, yeah.
While also welcoming in somebody new. There's a tremendous amount of pressure there. And I think I just really love that we're thinking about more than just the candidate, but also this manager who this all falls to, doesn't it? It always falls to the hiring manager, and they're not equipped.
Yeah. And the worst part is, I was going through the emotions, and, all these emotions just make the day harder for the hiring manager. It just makes their whole employee experience just horrible as well. And at the end, you may not just lose your new hire, you may lose your hiring manager because they don't feel supported in the whole process. Like feeling helpless, unsupported, frustrated, stressed. Like these are emotions you don't want your employees to have. And anything that you do to alleviate that or make it the flip side or the opposite, I mean, you'll just be a better culture, a better organization. So let's talk a little bit about the ideal experience. So the opposite of that. I know, with Immersity, you guys have, you're adding more stuff to the onboarding program to help integrate people more into their culture. And I think that's really important. A lot of people just look at onboarding as just setting up the employee with their laptop and their access to tools, and they don't really see it as an opportunity to really embed them in the culture in a lot of ways. And that's what I want to focus on this one too. In the first day, like one of the first things that my experience is learning about the history of the company, the vision, the values, and understanding where she fits in the whole organization. I think that's really important. A lot of people kind of step over that or don't prioritize that in the onboarding.
I think it's important that leadership is involved, to your point, in telling that story. People love stories. They want to hear stories, especially success stories, or even stories that have, some twists and turns in them in terms of how or where the company came from. You want to feel like you're a part of something. And what I love about this too is that you've demonstrated, or you've designed it to where the person also knows where they fit in. I think I would add, Daniel, that talking about how decisions are made within the organization is also a really cool way to engage a new hire from the beginning. So they know, what's expected of them, and that they can stick their neck out and share ideas and make decisions from day one, that, it's encouraged and, even welcomed.
Well, transparency, that's something that everyone, everyone wants, everyone feels part of the team when that happens. I think that's a great add. And part of the reason of adding these slides too was, I think if you're going to formulate an onboarding team, which is something that I recommend in the video, if your company doesn't have one, I think it's good to put one together and bring in stakeholders like IT, the hiring managers, your people team, everyone that kind of touches the new hire as they move through the onboarding. And if you do have one of those teams and you're figuring out how to improve your onboarding process, going through an exercise like this puts you in a good mindset, right? Talk about you can do the employee survey and figure out what onboarding looks like and really map out that experience, and then talk about what bad experiences you've had and what good experiences you've had. And that will kind of kickstart, ideas in your brain of what you want to do when you create an onboarding program.
Yes. And if someone's part of that team, Daniel, and they say, well, I didn't have any of this and I'm still here and I'm fine, they don't belong on that team. Scoot them right off of that team. Let them go do their job, and that's it.
Yeah, that reminds me of, the book Good to Great, where, the first part is getting the right people on the bus, in the right seat on the bus. And, if you don't have someone who cares about onboarding or the onboarding experience, they probably shouldn't be on the team.
Well, you know what it also does too? It brings up this idea, and I learn it every day. I'm given examples of this where, what I think somebody might need or want is completely opposite from what they actually tell me they need or want. So we can't even begin to imagine what we think, especially if we're someone who's, been with an organization for a while. We know our place, we fit in well. We bring our authentic selves to work. We're forgetting what it's like to be that first, day, first 90 days, even first year of a new role, and what that feels like. And so to try to guess at what somebody wants, or think, well, I wanted this, so that must apply to them, I think it's the wrong way to approach it, right? I think we need to be much more open-minded. And you mentioned in asking employees, what their experience was like. We want to make sure that we're bringing people what they need. I learned, like, as I mentioned, every day, generationally, we want different things, just even geographically, I think people want different things. So just finding out what that is, and then give it to them. If you can, give it to them. There's no risk.
That's so true. Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about this before we started recording too. And maybe you can share that story of just and where we ended up was figuring out how to customize as much as you can. And figuring out what candidates need as they're moving through the onboarding process and even the talent acquisition process. So do you want to share that story really quick, and then we can kind of riff off of that?
Yeah, I can. And I think, this really just starts our whole theme, Daniel, that I think you and I both think and feel very strongly, is that there's no one right way to do it, right? There's not this prescriptive, you must follow these steps. But if you do what we're suggesting and you make it your own, at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. That's where you're going to find the greatest success in welcoming, new hires to your organization. The story you're referring to, I was meeting with a potential client yesterday, a really great, engaging guy, and he's head of talent and acquisition for his firm. And he was sharing with me that they, like most organizations right now, are experiencing some turnover, and they've had to really pick up the pace when it comes to how they are, how long or how they're processing people through the hiring process, if you will. So bringing people through that process. And he mentioned that because, they want to, make sure to capitalize on meeting really great people who they know can add value. They're starting to speed things up so they can catch those candidates, and really get the right people in the door. But because they've sped it up so fast, they're actually getting feedback on the flip side that candidates are saying you're moving too fast, which I hadn't heard that yet. I mean, I believe him, and that is his experience, and I'm sure it's happening all over. But this idea, and I made a joke with him that, he's got to land on the Goldilocks, pace with which they should go through the process. And I think what that did for me, and where you and I ended, when we were chatting earlier, is this idea that even if we set an expectation, so this, talent and acquisition leader at this firm, I admire, his approach to his role, because he is trying to meet the candidates where they are and give them what they need. Though you cannot adjust for every single person. You can't adjust an organizational process for every single person. You'd never please everybody, right? And you're not going to get what you need long-term. I mean, you're the process expert. So, you could even weigh in on that. And I think, but we shared that even if the, recruiter, let's say, I'm a recruiter and I meet you, Daniel, and I say, hey, when we meet someone who's really impressive and we know could add value to our organization, we tend to move at a pretty fast pace to get you in the door and through our process, just to set that expectation. I feel like if I was that candidate, I would be able to take a deep breath and think, oh, okay, this is just how it's going to go. Yeah. And I might be a little uncomfortable, but I would just know that up front and be able to take myself through it rather than freak out, if things are moving too quickly.
And that goes to what we were talking about before about transparency, and it's all about communication, right? So even if you set those expectations, it gives the opportunity for the candidate to give you some feedback on that. Mm-hmm. So even if you say, hey, if you're someone that we really like, we're going to move really, really fast. And they might give you some context of, well, I'm still thinking about, the opportunity, I would like to go at this certain pace. Is that okay with you? And then you can communicate and adjust that way.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of customization and figuring out like what parts you can customize and what you can't. So you have kind of a thread line of your core ops, and maybe that's 80% that's immovable or not customizable, but that 20% you can probably customize, which could include the pacing, who interviews and what types of interviews you're doing. So that 20% can be customizable, and that alone can help the candidate feel a lot better about the whole experience. So. Mm-hmm. Definitely things to think about as you're going through your talent acquisition as well as your onboarding.
Yeah.
There you go. Great. So why don't we move to the next topic, which was just all the different onboarding categories and things that you need to think about. So let me throw the slide back up. All right. Okay, so here are the onboarding areas, and Carrie, you can definitely add to it. This was just kind of a starting point to get people's thoughts flowing. But on a high level, I figured there would be setup, which is just getting the employee up and running. Their work-related onboarding, so that's more related to the hiring manager, getting them figuring out how they fit in the organization, their role, maybe some training, and then the third, culture, which I think is probably one of the most important. And thinking of the three pillars of culture. Purpose, community, and growth. So I gave specific kind of checklist items, but what are your thoughts on this? Anything I'm missing or anything that you would add as like a core category or maybe a subcategory under these different areas?
I think I would like to elaborate on the training piece, though I will say that what I love about what you've done here is that it's a much more holistic approach to what onboarding should look like. I've had so many conversations. In fact, just yesterday, the gentleman that I spoke about, that we're talking about, and actually they reached out to us because they need help with onboarding. He kept referring to onboarding as that setup. That first category that you're talking about or that you've mentioned here. And a lot of organizations think the setup is the onboarding and then that's it. But that's not the case, right? And through conversation yesterday, we talked a lot about that. And I tried to really help him reframe this idea that onboarding is all the other. He had great ideas for what else he wanted to expose his new hires to, but he wasn't thinking about it in his own mind as that's part of the onboarding. Most people think the setup is it. And so we're here to say, nope, keep going, got to keep trying and do more. For the candidate. And so to answer your question, I think you really, this is thorough and I appreciate that. And that's always what I love about working with you is that you really don't miss details. And I would just say that with the training piece, with the actual work piece, and even this could fit in culture too, Daniel, I think as people understand, how they can show up authentically to work, what does that sound like for them or look like for them? I think having conversations like you mentioned about core values and vision and mission, but I also recommend and this is where I think we take our programming to the next level at Inspirant Group is this idea that also exposing your new hire to really engaging or what we like to call next level content within the onboarding is a really cool way to get them immersed right away into what the organization is about. We are recommending most of the time now, if a client is amenable, which often they are, to include programming around emotional intelligence. right? We know that an emotionally intelligent workforce is one that's highly productive and efficient. So, talking about that from the beginning, helping them to really understand what that is and how to apply some tools and best practices to increase their own emotional intelligence. It's going to reflect in how they communicate with one another, how they show up, the grace that they give each other, which we all need right now. I think we've also recommended that organizations include, I mentioned this earlier in our chat about decision making, but also critical thinking is really key. So many people can benefit from a framework on how to think critically through a problem or a solution, especially someone who's newer to the workforce. Mm-hmm. What a cool way, to help them start off by saying, oh, okay, there's problems that I'm faced with. Here's a process or a way to solve that problem, at least until I find my own footing.
I love that. It's just thinking about, as going above the setup and I like that next level training where, hey, let's think about who our ideal employee is and our ideal teammate, and how do we get them within the onboarding, more training so that they can grow in those areas that we want them to grow in. From emotional intelligence to critical thinking, all that kind of stuff. I love that because it goes into also that growth aspect, like their professional development and their personal development starts from day one, which I think is great.
And, I don't have a stat in front of me right now, Daniel, to share, but I do know they exist. And a quick search would bring you to, if you just search like how valuable or how today's candidate values, personal development and growth, through these learning and development opportunities, it's well above 50%. In fact, it's, 75% of candidates say that it's part of their hiring or their decision as to where they go to work based on, what types of opportunities beyond just their salary, right, and where they work.
Oh, definitely. And I watched a video on YouTube yesterday. I might link it in the description below. But the guy was essentially just giving advice about people's careers, especially, emerging professionals coming out of college, university. And he had said there's kind of what was his quote? His quote was, you're either learning, you're earning, or you should quit. And that was kind of the three things that he said. So when you take on a job, maybe you're not earning as much, but you better be learning as much as you can to kind of grow your career. And then as you progress, maybe at some point you're not learning as much, you're kind of doing the same thing, but you're earning a lot. So that kind of balances it out. But I think a lot of people are thinking it that way. It's like, you're looking at what you learn and what you earn together. And if one of them isn't balanced or one of them isn't, at the level that they want, they're going to leave. So if you don't have a learning component to your offering, to new candidates, that's going to set you back. And especially in this market, you need to offer something because people can go anywhere. And a lot of people are thinking about this if you aren't.
Yeah. And even, some people might feel overwhelmed with that, Daniel, if they're starting from the beginning, and watching this video and saying, okay, I just need to set up an onboarding program. And maybe the learning piece has to come later as like a phase 2 or 3. I would recommend even something like a stipend to give employees to then invest in their own learning, right? If they want to go find a course or something that they'd like to engage with, give them some money to do that. I think that's a way to short-term, right, help with that learning piece.
Yeah. So I was looking at that too, because, and that's actually my next video is going to be on learning and development. So maybe I'll have you back after I publish that video. But yes, if you don't have, especially if you don't have the resources to do it, there are tons of, apps and tools up there, even, LinkedIn Learning. There's stuff that you can give people. If you don't have the time or necessarily the people yet, you can put them on a path of learning and promote it and encourage it in your culture in different ways.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Very cool. All right. So the next one was kind of my purple board or my whiteboard.
I like that.
Yeah. So what I want to kind of showcase in that one was what the interactive activity could look like. So as we talked about the different categories and, putting sticky notes on the whiteboard or using Mural, as we've both worked on before together, which is a very cool tool. So putting up everything under those different categories, and then from there, shifting it over to some kind of timeline roadmap. So you can kind of figure out and start sequencing what those activities look like. So any thoughts on that? Does this make sense, or do you think this would be how would you approach it if you were trying to put a program together?
I think this is a great way to approach it. I think it's important to establish some sort of first, like let's define what it looks like today, and then define success. What is the, a successful onboarding program look like for our organization? What are those elements? And maybe you don't know what those are yet, but you can start to piece that together. And then your exercise that you're suggesting will actually help them fill in all those blanks. I think that what I love about what you've done is that it's pre-first day, right? Onboarding doesn't start on the first day. It starts the moment they accept your offer. What is happening between that time and the time that they actually set foot in or log on, to your system? So set foot in your office or log into your systems. And I think, that pre-setup is critical. I think I would just continue to encourage anyone who's involved in these conversations within your organization to forget, if someone shares something or an experience that they had and they think that sounds crazy, or they wouldn't experience that or feel that way about that experience. Too bad. That's someone else's truth. That's their experience. And it all has to be considered while you're building, a program that hopefully is going to meet the needs of a lot of different people.
Yeah, for sure. And I love the thought of, hey, their first day is not their actual first day. It goes to the contract. I would say maybe even think about it of the first time you meet them. So add the talent acquisition process into like, hey, you're going to start onboarding them as soon as you meet them. So they're going to start getting introduced to your culture, start understanding how you guys work. And even in the job description, you can put kind of a ramp up plan that we'll talk about in a second of like what, their first 30, 60, 90 days looks like on the job. I think the more information you put in the job description helps people, and it actually, puts them in the right mindset. So once they start, they kind of have a roadmap of where they're going. But yeah, pre-first day, I think is super important, especially in the remote world we live in now. I've heard of companies that have sent their remote workers an entire workstation before day one, which includes like a desk, a chair, and a monitor, all that kind of stuff with their care package and all their swag. Like imagine you just accept the offer, you're starting in a week or two, and you get all these, gifts that come to your door.
Oh, cool.
To make sure that you're ready, day one. I think that just kind of shows, how much you care and how much you're looking forward to them starting. And it just sets everything off on the right foot.
Like we say, there's no risk to any of it. There is absolutely no risk. And challenging me because I was thinking about, when they accept the offer, but you challenged me to even think beyond that when you first meet a candidate. And I think, what about, it's so valuable to think about their experience all the way through, of course, but think about those candidates who don't end up accepting your offer, but they might tell a friend that I had this really great experience, or on the flip, I had a really terrible experience through the hiring process or through the interview process, and I would never work there. If that's any indication of how they function, as a greater organization, but it could go either way, couldn't it? If I knew you and I ended up for whatever reason not choosing that firm, but I knew you might really enjoy a role there, I would tell you, hey, I really loved it. You should interview there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, because you're representing your company at each stage.
Yes.
So if you start thinking about right when you meet the candidate that, hey, they might be an employee, so let's start treating them or showing them, and integrating them right away. I think it'll do wonders for your culture and just spreading the word.
Yeah, sorry. It makes me think about having really deliberate and intentional conversations with anyone as well who will interact with a new employee from pre-hire to that first day, first 90 days, and first, I think 90 days, right? Are critical. I remember, because who isn't really enthusiastic and excited? A lot of that's powered by adrenaline in the beginning, of course.
Yep.
But people are just really thrilled, to be in a new role. They're nervous, as you mentioned, but also really excited, and they're eager. Your high performers are eager to add value right away. And so you can walk into any, organization. Let's say if you are walking into a building, or even if you're logging in, and maybe your first person you meet after you get through, the lobby, or let's assume we're remote, the first person I have a meeting with is IT, right? Just to double check that I have everything. Yep. Let's say the IT person is late, or they're just really not enthusiastic at all, or they don't make me feel, welcome, or even, they just maybe, burst my bubble a little bit in terms of excitement. That's going to also affect, maybe not as deeply, but that's going to affect. And it's those little things, right? It's like a little thumbtack is like stuck in your arm and someone just taps it, right? It's just a little thing that over time is going to start to really hurt. And so having a conversation with all of IT or whoever interacts with the people that are new and say, this is a time to really show some enthusiasm. You don't need to be somebody different, but you need to show up for these people and let them know that you're happy they're here.
Definitely. Would you suggest, since they're going to interact with IT, finding the right people in IT to be part of that onboarding team. Yeah, for sure.
Yes, right. Some people just really, and there's no wrong way, right? There are people who just prefer not to engage, and just really do their job. It's true, right? You may know this, right? There are people that they choose IT because, they can focus on processes and systems, and they don't have to engage, one-on-one with anybody that often. And that's fine. We need people like that. Though there's someone on that team, I'm certain, who likes to engage with other people and would really love that opportunity. So let's give them that role of, hey, anyone who starts new or any class that's new, you're the one who's going to show them, around our systems and help make sure they get logged in and have what they need to get started.
Yeah, I would definitely approach it that way. I'm also kind of thinking, have you ever been to one of those really nice restaurants and everyone in the restaurant is treating you like the most important person in the world?
Yeah.
And it could be a busser, someone who's just cleaning the plates, and they come and, they're treating you just like the owner of the restaurant would. And that's got to be embedded in their culture and trained. Like that doesn't just happen on its own. So I'm thinking about like taking that concept to a company. How do you train all your employees to you guys are all recruiters. You guys are all part of the onboarding team. And this is the experience that we'd like all our candidates and our employees to have, and kind of even making that the training that happens every year. So just like when someone walks into a fine dining restaurant, everyone's treating them, amazingly, similar to in the company. New hires, people know they're coming in, they're welcoming, and they're kind of treating them with this amazing experience because they're all kind of prepped and trained to do that. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does. I think that really has to come down to, and I think, what I thought about immediately when you said that is change management, right? Because any new onboarding program or approach to onboarding, like we're talking about, really and trying to encourage companies to think about and build, anything like that it's a change within the organization. And so it starts with communication. How does each person contribute, to the onboarding program? Just because you happen to be in marketing and you have nothing to do with the actual, onboarding and I would imagine marketing is probably involved. That was maybe not the right, maybe purchasing, maybe you're in purchasing, right? And you're not engaged or involved with every new hire that comes through because it's just not part of your role. But if you happen to run into somebody in the kitchen, or if you see them on a company Zoom or something, sending them a note and saying, hey, welcome. Or, hey, I noticed you're new, or we haven't met yet. I know that's scary for a lot of people, but boy, does that go a long way. And I think that's the professional workplace, equivalent to what you're talking about when you talk about going to a nice restaurant. It doesn't even have to be high-end restaurant. There are places that everyone is treating you and has each other's back. How many times have you been somewhere where you need your server and you wave down somebody else because your server is really busy, especially now, right? They have lots of tables, and someone's like, oh, okay, I'll go get them, instead of, how can I help you? Right. So they have each other's back. If they'll get you the salt, or they'll get you some more water, or the ranch that you didn't get, when you asked for it. So they're all pitching in. And I think just that little bit goes a really long way to help people understand, what is your role, as a member of this organization. If you see someone who's new or needs some assistance, step in or find them someone who can help them.
Yeah, I kind of want to think of training that you can do and give everyone and what you would need. And what I'm thinking right now is every employee should absolutely know the entire end-to-end onboarding experience. Like what happens first day, first week, first month, and maybe beyond. And then when new hires come in, you just kind of give a reminder to everyone, and this is our process. This is what we're hoping. This is the experience we want. You may not be you might have not have a specific task in this, but you should understand the overall process. So when you engage with someone, kind of where they are in that whole process and what they're looking for next and how you can help in different ways.
And I would take it one step further. Whenever we're talking about any sort of change in behavior, it's really worthwhile to talk about what that looks like. And so I might say to somebody in purchasing, just to continue with my example, this is the process, to your point, right? This is what we've created a new experience, for all new hires. And this is what they experience as they go. And you might find yourself in a situation where you're meeting a new hire at some point, or running into one, in the halls. This is what, it sounds like to be welcoming. onboarding and really give them some examples. Like, I think people need to hear and talk about, they need to hear what's appropriate that we might say, or be given some suggestions. So they might even just have the one liner that they just have ready to go. If they're not someone who really likes to engage, on the clip, really quick, like in the moment, on the spot. But also, like, this is what it looks like. Maybe it's an email instead of a personal, conversation, with somebody, but just helping them to talk through, what does it sound like? And what does it look like to be welcoming to a new hire?
Yeah. And what to do when something you catch is going wrong, right? So,
yes.
Yeah. So say you're in purchasing, you have nothing to do with onboarding, but you engage with this new hire, and all of a sudden they said, like, yeah, I've been waiting for my laptop for 2 weeks, and hasn't been a great experience. Like, as a purchasing employee, even though you have nothing to do with the hardware, you have the power to go to IT and say, hey, this is a new hire. They've been waiting for 2 weeks. Like, what's going on? And yeah, empowering your employees to improve the process, find errors, and keep iterating and making it better. I think that's part of the culture, and part of making your onboarding better every time is, people are empowered to do that.
And assuming, I think in your example, if I'm in purchasing, I'm assuming that IT doesn't know, or else they would have already done something about it, right? Like, there's that, we have to give people the benefit of the doubt, and one could slip through the cracks, right? Or maybe it's not IT's fault. Maybe it's been on order for 8 weeks,
right? Supply chain issues. Yeah.
Right. And so just, maybe there's a check-in that's needed with that employee from IT, or maybe there's someone else's extra laptop they could just get in their hands for short term. I mean, there is a way to just keep, again, that transparency and that communication up. And if I happen to tell you in purchasing that I'm new and I don't have a laptop and I'm sort of wandering around, again, yes, that's the opportunity to say, I'm sure you know this, Daniel and IT, though I experienced this, or this is what they said. And it just seemed like they're pretty bummed out.
Yeah. And it's just like your example, everyone's got each other's back too, right? So it's not pointing fingers, but it's like, hey, let me help out IT. Maybe something went wrong, or maybe they automated that process and something broke in the automation.
And they didn't know.
And no one knows. Yeah.
Yes. No one knows. Right. You're exactly right. Like, we all have to work together. If we're really going to be, I like this word community when I think about a workplace, and we're all part of that community. And so if that's the case, what does it look like for me to contribute in a really positive way to the community? And that's just it, making sure I elevate or escalate things that I know shouldn't be.
Right. I love that. So this was kind of, okay, once you've got everything together, you can start putting it into a playbook. And then I started adding swim lanes of, who's responsible for what on which day becomes a checklist. And then I suggested going even further, and specifically for first day, maybe first week, having very detailed timelines of when things happen. So you can do the IT check-in, like we just talked about, where, people are just, double checking things as they're going through, and having that detail. And saying also, when you have this type of detail, then you can start thinking about automating and what areas make sense to automate. So yeah, any thoughts on that? Like the playbook, the checklist, schedules, automation, making that day just better, or that onboarding experience better?
I would add some fun in here on some level. I think that these are all.
This is too. Yeah.
This is all really important stuff. Please don't mistake. This is all super important, but maybe we could have a little fun too in that day.
This is why I'm processing your.
Totally. I mean, you could even do something, because I really like the idea of empowering a new hire and also giving them, some direction that is, a way for you as the new hiring manager or whomever, colleague, to really see, do they pick up the ball and run with it, right? If I give them some direction, do they actually do what I have asked them to do? Because we're going to want to see that. We want them to take initiative. We want them to, step in and start contributing. So I might give them a scavenger hunt of people they need to reach out to say hi to, or even like a fun way to learn about, maybe you have SharePoint, as your document management, having them search for certain documents that would be helpful to them, rather than just giving them those, as a way to click this and access. I think that's key, but also the best way to learn is to experience it. So give them a way to click through and learn and figure out, maybe there's something that's hidden, in there that they might come across. I think about this story that I read a few months ago about a professor who, at the end of his syllabus, did you see this? At the end of his syllabus, he was a college professor. He wrote at the bottom that there was like $50 in a locked like PO box or something, or somewhere on campus, and that the key code was X. Like, and he put it in at the very end of the syllabus. And by the end of the semester, he went to that box, and not a single student had read through the syllabus to go and get the $50. Right. So this idea that we can get people engaged in doing some independent work as well, because they don't think about too, when you start a new job, we talked about the adrenaline, we talked about the excitement, and then also exhaustion that comes with starting a new job. We're exhausted because we are on high alert.
Overwhelmed. Yeah.
You're overwhelmed. You want to make a really good impression on everyone you come across. So you are exhausted. So I like the idea of giving people some ways to independently move the needle a little bit and do some things that doesn't involve engaging with somebody else for every minute of that first day or even week. So there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do to encourage people to connect, but also learn on their own about the organization too.
I love that. Like self-service items, right? Going to an onboarding page instead of having someone kind of force feed you forms, just say like, hey, these are the forms you need to fill out. And this is when you kind of need it done. Do it on your own time. I love the scavenger hunt idea. Because a lot of people, you can tell them what to do, but you learn best by doing it yourself, right?
Absolutely. We know that for
especially,
sure.
Oh yeah. So like finding documents in a SharePoint, making that a fun scavenger hunt activity. It's fun, and also will kind of show them and ingrain in their minds, okay, this is where some of the knowledge is that.
Yeah. Well, and think about the information you could get as the leadership at the organization. If your SharePoint isn't organized in a way that's intuitive, that's also some feedback, isn't it? If people can't get to where you're sending them, you take that and say, maybe it's not as easy. Maybe I've been doing it for 10 years or 5 years or whatever. So it's really easy for me, but maybe it's not, for somebody who's first engaging, newly engaging with the SharePoint.
Yeah. That's very true. You can actually learn a lot from someone's kind of outside perspective that isn't part and ingrained in the culture and the process.
Yeah. So that makes me think also about when somebody's new, if you've hired the right people who are really bright and want to add value, they're going to bring up things like that. They're going to ask questions that might feel, dare I say, annoying, right? When they first start, maybe. They might feel like you're like, oh, they caught this. Oh, they saw that. But that's not what we really mean. And it says that. But that is a really good mirror into, what it is that we need to fix. This is a brand new set of eyes, as you mentioned, who's experiencing the organization and the systems from the very beginning. They're not used to like, oh yeah, I know to just click that instead of that because I've been doing it, for 3 years. But with somebody new coming in, like, why don't we fix that, to make it that much more easy? So really giving someone that space and not passing judgment on somebody's new who's really is just trying to say like, this was kind of weird, or this was hard, or this says this.
Encourage that. Yeah, for sure. Like not just green light that behavior, but encourage it and say like, hey, we're not perfect. And we're going to, put you on these scavenger hunts and all this kind of stuff. Anything that you think you can do better or could be done better, let us know. Cause I love that. Absolutely love it. Very cool. All right. More fun. That's good feedback. The last one, I'll just throw it on the screen really quick, was I think it's important. You don't have to have any type of document like this, but at least have kind of expectations of what you expect a person to go from new hire to fully ramped up and what that looks like. And I know this is more kind of emerging professionals that are coming on as consultants, but having something like this, like, hey, we think in 8 months, you should be up to full speed. And along the way, here are some kind of guideposts and milestones of what we expect. And there's definitely a dip, every new person that comes in, they're not going to understand everything, know all the tools, the processes, the culture. So they will go through that dip of, hey, I'm not too confident in what I'm doing. I'm still figuring this stuff out, and bake that into the ramp up plans. Like, yeah, you're not going to be as efficient as you would like to be, and that we know you're going to be. And in this time period, that's kind of your accelerated learning. And here's what we're going to try to do to help you accelerate that. But totally understand if you're not confident and you feel comfortable and psychologically safe to ask questions and to ask the dumb questions or whatever. They're not dumb questions, and give them that safe space to grow and learn and to understand, okay, I know by month 3, I should be a little better. And then by month 8, I should be fully ramped up. And I just think that's a good way to onboard someone past the first week, the first, month kind of thing.
I absolutely agree. I think when we're uncomfortable, we're learning. And so especially in that first phase of accelerated learning, that's the discomfort, and being really transparent about that. We expect you to feel uncomfortable. There's might be a lot of gray area. Daniel, you and I know people don't like gray. And so when they're in some gray area, they're going to be uncomfortable. The other takeaway that I have from that is that it's a template, right? It's a framework that you could actually, as HR within an organization, you could give, and I think you even mentioned this in the video, give it to the hiring manager. Give them a template though. Don't ask them to start from scratch on anything, because it's just not fair. Give them a template that you would use for any role when someone is onboarding. It's got the same timeline of the 8 months, or maybe it's a year, depending on the role. I know from personal experience, it's always taken me a full year to really feel like I have my feet under me, within an organization. And setting that expectation up front is really valuable, because people can take a breath and say, okay, I have some time. And I think the framework, and then having the hiring manager really fill in those milestones, or those that, and adding the detail as to, by this point, let's make sure you know this. And if you don't know it by this point, let me know, and let's figure out what got in the way. I think there's some ebbing and flowing that happens there, and there's a whole lot of discomfort, and that's okay.
And I was thinking through how a team can put one of those together. So a hiring manager in your team, I'd say bring everyone together and say, hey, what does it look like for someone to be at full speed? And for you, how long did it take? For you, how long did it take? And kind of get that window of time of when that can happen. And then from there go, okay, well, if this is them operating at full capacity, what does it look like if they're operating at half and then at 25? And then you can kind of build the ramp up from there of saying, okay, if they're halfway up to speed, then they're kind of doing these things. These are things they're probably not very good at, they need help with. And then you start creating with your team that whole ramp up plan. And I like the idea, if you're part of the people team, or if you're that solo HR person, like come up with a template that everyone can use, and then give it to hiring managers to kind of fill in those milestones. I love that.
The other thing I just thought of too that really could add some value to this, like when you think about that timeline, is the specific on the job training. So some roles require a lot more specific systems training, to do their job, right? Although one of my experiences when I've actually had to build onboarding programs, and I sit with people who, let's say they're in a call center and they're, doing their job, and I'm on a Y-cord and I'm listening to how they're interacting with their customers. One of the things I always make sure to ask is, what do you wish you knew from the beginning that you didn't learn? But also, what didn't you need? Because a lot of times organizations try to throw everything, especially like I said, these very job specific knowledge, right? Not the company overview and all the things that we're talking about that's valuable to anybody, but the very specific job tasks and systems, and daily things. Like there's always something. So we always have the tendency to throw everything into that. But what happens is the person gets so overwhelmed in the learning period that they don't retain it. And so then they get in to do their role, and they're not actually focused on the most important pieces of like engaging with the client. And, most customers will understand if somebody says, if they're really friendly and they're expressing empathy and they're really showing that they're trying to help, most customers will understand that maybe somebody's new and they're learning, or they need some assistance. And so asking the question, what do you wish you knew? But also, what didn't you need to know these first 3 months?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that you could build on later, right? You can add that. That could be a later, after 90 days, you take this e-learning course to learn that skill, or, just take it out of there, because we don't want to overwhelm somebody in the beginning.
Exactly. I love that. Figuring out when to give the information at the right time.
Yeah. There's an art to it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Love that. Very cool. That was the last slide. So I think that is it. Any other thoughts, Carrie, about onboarding, or anything that you want to plug?
I don't need to plug. Obviously I'm passionate about this, Daniel. You know this. I think that's why you asked me to join you today. I would have conversations like this all day long. So if anyone would like to reach out and chat with me about onboarding, or just people development in general, I'm thrilled to connect. I would say, as a closing, I've already said this, but I just feel so compelled to say it again, is that there's no risk. There's no risk to any of this, right? Whatever your organization can manage, from a bandwidth perspective, to really focus on the experience of your new hires, the better off you'll be. There's no risk to it. You'll learn from it. People will undoubtedly have a lot more fun. I use that word again. Joining your organization, they'll be validated, right, in choosing to work for your organization. And then you can keep improving. Break it down into phases that are a lot more manageable.
Awesome. Well, we will link your information, LinkedIn, maybe your email, and people will reach out, and we'll go from there.
That sounds
Thanks
great.
again, Carrie. It was a great conversation.
Always. I love talking to you. Thanks, Daniel.
All right.